Self-study of clinical looking glass, tutorial 4, the diabetic cohort. For a deeper and amusing understanding of how to use cohorts to analyze healthcare quality, read Riddles in Accountable Healthcare by Aron Bellin, available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. You now have background in clinical looking glass and understand in general how it functions. We will now proceed to actually build a diabetic cohort in clinical looking glass. There are three elements that you have to consider. You have to define for a cohort the event. In this case, it will be a laboratory test of the type hemoglobin A1C and a value greater than 9.5. We're going to look for people who have a hemoglobin A1C and a value greater than 9.5. You have to define a time period where you're looking for them. In this case, it's going to be June 1st, 2002 to June 1st, 2003. Notice the square brackets means included, and the round bracket means not included. And you also should, but do not have to, define a demographic. In our case, we're going to define a demographic age 21 to 65, inclusive of 21, excluding 65. Now let's go to clinical looking glass. First, you type in your password. And you log in. You'll notice in clinical looking glass you have a very easy to use GUI. It shows you how to get to Study Designer and how to get to Event Canvas. We are going to be building our cohorts on Event Canvas. There are other smart reports. There are tools to help you build items in looking glass. There's a help section that has manuals. This is a user manual. Information on the ad hoc reports. Information on the event definition. So all the events in looking glass can be found here and their attributes. So you're able to decide what events you actually want to look at for your cohort. There's also streaming video. So that in addition to the videos you're getting right now, within looking glass you can go in and on a topic find all sorts of useful information. For example, on the event canvas, it tells you how to build a cohort, how to use a within, how to use a when-in. All these issues we will cover, but if you want another take on it, you can use the internal videos of looking glass. Let's go to Event Canvas. The first step is to realize that Event Canvas opens up on what's called the management pane. This area here is a management pane. When you hit the plus sign, you can see that I've already written some cohorts in the past. I'm going to want to create a new folder, a new place where I'm going to put all the work that we are going to be doing together. The first thing to notice in management pane is when I hover, the line collections and cohorts gets surrounded by a box. That tells you that the system is now ready to take an order from you. That's a convention. Hover over something and it either changes color or a box surrounds it. You're going to right-click on Collections and Cohort, and now you see a drop-down menu. This is a common approach. Hover and right-click, and a drop-down menu will appear. I then hover over New, and I get a number of choices: Folder, Cohort, or Event Collection. I want to build a folder, so I hover over the folder, and I left-click on it. On the right-hand side, and this is where the event canvas is, I have my new folder, and I'm going to put a name into it. And its name is going to be Diabetic. Above the title, I have a couple of possibilities. I can save and exit, I can exit. On the right-hand side, I have room to put in a description. And in this case, I'll just write my first diabetic cohort. And this is useful later if you want to know what it was you were thinking about at the time you built the cohort. I'm going to hover over the negative sign, make it negative. Now I have my folder. I'm going to Save, and you'll see that a new folder called Diabetic appears in the management panel. I can save and exit, and now I'm back in the management panel. Now what I want to do is I want to actually build a cohort. I want to build the cohort, and I want that cohort to be inside this folder. I hover over the folder. It already has a box around it, so it's ready for action. I right-click to make the menu appear, and I choose New, and I choose Cohort. I hover over Cohort, and I left-click. Now the event canvas appears with three separate sections. The first section is the title, just as you had before for the folder, where you can put in a description. The event canvas itself, this is where the condition lines, the rules to build the cohort, are actually being painted. Remember, the canvas, the paradigm or metaphor, is a canvas that we're going to paint on. And on the bottom is a GUI editor. And this is a common approach that we have. We have title, active canvas, and on the bottom, the GUI editor. The GUI editor makes it possible for us to write rules on the canvas. The first things we're going to do in the GUI editor is we're going to give this event or this condition line a name. And we want to identify the event that's going to define someone as a diabetic. We want to define the duration, when we're going to look for that person, and we're going to want to define the demographics. And when we do those three things, and we hit update and close, a line will appear here that will be the rules that we've just built. So let's do that. So first let's define our new event. Hover over the new event definition. Notice how it's become yellow. Left click on it, because we're actually selecting from the downward arrow. And you left click on your choice, new event definition. Another window opens up. This window will allow you to choose the event and to specify certain attributes of that event that are important for identifying patients. So we're going to call this, we're going to name it hemoglobin A1C greater than or equal to 9.5. We're going to look at the event types that we could choose. Now there are a number of different event types that are here that could define someone as a diabetic. Here's an inpatient admission. We could say, let's find all the patients who have an inpatient admission and a diagnosis of diabetes. That would be a fully legitimate way of defining a diabetic, but it's not our choice. We could base this upon inpatient discharge. So again, it's a hospitalization. What we're using as our index date, the discharge date, rather than the admission date. Inpatient admission would be the hospitalization, using as the index date the inpatient admission date. Inpatient discharge would be the hospitalization, using the discharge date as the index date. We could do this, we could identify diabetics based on a lab test. We'll come back to that. We could identify a diabetic based on medication used in the hospital. Did the patient have insulin being given? He's a diabetic. We could base this upon a prescription used in the outpatient. At Montefiore, prescriptions are different from orders. Orders are medications that are ordered in the hospital, and prescriptions are medications that are actually given in the outpatient. So you could have some patient who has insulin as an outpatient, and that would define him as a diabetic. You could also have a problem list that a doctor said this is a diabetic. There are many different ways you can define a diabetic. By the way, as we said before, on the inpatient service, you can have a medication order, but you can also have internal medicine administration date. And this is actually the medications that were given. You're therefore able to identify a patient as diabetic either by his medication order, which is an inpatient medication order, an inpatient internal medicine administration date, what it was actually given, or a prescription date, medication that was given in the outpatient. Those are other ways to define a diabetic. We will choose, however, to identify our patients using a lab test event. So we hover over lab test and we left click to select it. Now all this is saying is we've found a patient with a lab test, but we haven't specified yet what that lab test has to be. So we hover over the definition, this is a definition canvas page, right? We hover over the definition, a box appears around it, we right click over it, and we see we have a choice, add a condition or add a subgroup. We're going to add a condition. And a line appears. This is going to be a condition line. You can see it's in red, so it's not been defined yet. And we go down to the bottom of the window and look for the GUI editor. And here we have the GUI editor, and we look to see what conditions we can impose on this lab test. Well, there are a number of interesting conditions. Among them is lab test type. And since we want a hemoglobin A1C, that seems to be the condition we want to impose. So we hover over lab test type, we left click on it, we then choose equals that to, and now all the lab tests that are available to Montefiore are here. Anything that ever was used, even in an experimental way. Those lab tests with the stars in front of them are not even real lab tests, so I'd ignore them. So we now want to actually look and find hemoglobin A1C. You can type in hemoglobin, and that brings you rapidly down to where the hemoglobin is, and then you go down to A1C, hemoglobin A1C, you hit enter, and now we've identified the lab test type as update and close. We've now identified the lab test type as being hemoglobin A1C, but we're not finished yet. We want another requirement, so we hover over definition, we right click on the definition, we add a condition, and that condition is going to be lab test value. The lab test value is going to be greater than or equal to 9.5. So that is the next condition we've added in the definition canvas by using the GUI editor. Now we see this unfinished line. By updating and close, we now populate that unfinished line, and now we have two lines. A line for lab test type equal hemoglobin A1C, and a lab test value greater than or equal to 9.5. We've now created our event definition with the appropriate attributes. We update and close, and we see that in that event box, in the original GUI editor, is populated the thing we just built. So this is a model of Looking Glass. You build an object in Looking Glass, you build a set of rules, and it populates the previous object or the previous set of rules. Now we want to identify the duration. We're going to create a new duration definition. Notice we left click on the downward arrow because we selected it. We then hover and left click on duration definition. A duration definition palette or canvas opens up. We give it a name. In this case, it'll be June of 02 to June of 03. We want to include June 1st, so we hit the checkbox here. It's 6102 to 6103. Because we don't check the box on 6103, it's not included in the interval of time. It's every minute up to but not including midnight of 6102. We update and close. And now when we update and close, we see that the duration definition is filled with the time period that we identified. The last piece of this analysis, so now we have identified the event that's going to define the cohort and the time period. These are required. As an option, you can also define the demographics. So we hover over the demographics, it highlights in yellow, we left click to select it, we create a new definition, demographic definition. We're going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it age 21 to 65. I hover over the definition. You notice a box appears around it. I right-click on it. I choose add condition by left-clicking on that. I go to the GUI editor below, and I notice that my options are age, ethnicity, gender, primary care MD set, so I can have a group of physicians I want to follow, preferred language, what language the patient's speaking, their race, the socioeconomic status. Everyone's address is mapped to a census block, census tract in New York State, and we give you the socioeconomic status as standard deviation from 0, which is the mean in New York State. In fact, at Montefiore, only 9% of our population is above the mean. Social Security number, whether it's present or absent, not the actual number itself, and the zip code set. We're going to choose age. Looking Glass tells us what do you want to choose. I want to choose ages between. You can see that it checks off the lower part because we wanted to get people from 21 to 65, as you recall. But we wanted to include age 21 and exclude age 65. Having now defined in the GUI what we want, we have this incomplete condition line here. We update and close, and the condition is now filled. We've now created on our definition canvas age between 21 to 65, and we're going to populate the original demographic definition here by updating and closing. There we have it. So now we have the three components: the hemoglobin A1C lab test, the date, and the age. The only other thing we want to do is make sure we're going to find the earliest or first hemoglobin A1C in this time period. There may have been many hemoglobin A1Cs, but we want the first one. Now we've completed all the elements of the GUI editor. We have this line on the event canvas still waiting to be filled. We're going to update and close, and this information is going to populate the first condition line on the event canvas. And there it is. The GUI editor disappears. The first line condition is there. There's only one condition line here. The index event line, which says I want to get the index date from which of these lines on the event canvas, but there's only one line, so you really don't have to specify. But it's usually good practice to specify which line you're looking at. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to hover. You see the box appear. We right-click, and we're going to edit. And we're going to say, instead of earliest of any, earliest of the event diabetes. And this will now, when we update and close, change this earliest of any to earliest of the event diabetes. Update and close. Now you have earliest event diabetes. I want to give this a name. I'm going to call it diabetes. And now I'm ready to build this cohort. I have my index event line pointing to the one condition line. I hover over the build. It turns yellow. I left click on build. And we see that there are 3,130 patients who had a hemoglobin A1C greater than or equal to 9.5 between June of 02 to June of 03 who were aged 21 to 65. Congratulations, you've built your first cohort. Now this cohort is completely built. Let's take a look at the management pane. It's green here because it's been built, but it's still yellow or you haven't exited this. This is an important point. If you exit right now, this will turn green. Everything that's here, the medical record numbers, the date times, all that information and the rules will be saved in your cohort. If you either save or save and exit, the only thing that will be saved will be the rules, and you will have to rebuild. So if you save or save and exit, this will stay yellow. If you just exit, this will stay green. You're there. First, let's do OK here. Let's exit. Watch this as I exit it. Are you sure you want to exit? The answer is yes. And it's nice and green. Make sure to always, when you're in Event Canvas exit, do not exit and save. Otherwise, this will be yellow and you'll have to rebuild. Congratulations, you've built your first cohort. Please remember that number, 3,130. If you don't remember it, you hover over it. You hover over the cohort, and at the bottom of the page, down here, look down here as I hover. If you hover over it, you see at the bottom of the page, 3,130. So you're quickly able to see the number of patients who are in that cohort. Now that you've built a cohort, let's see what you can do with it. As you might imagine, you can hover over the cohort itself, right-click, and you can see you have a number of choices. You can edit that cohort, which means add new rules or take away the rules. You can delete, you can get rid of the cohort completely. You can make a copy of it. You can copy it so that you can make modifications in the copy. You can view a summary of the cohort. As I said, Looking Glass completely self-documents. And here it is, diabetes, 3,130 distinct MRNs, the cohort type, the date it was built, who built it. And here's the rule. Event type with a lab test, hemoglobin A1C, and a lab test value greater than or equal to 9.5. This is the earliest. And a start date from 6/102 to 6/103, including the start date, not including the end date, and age between 21 and 65. You'll find the summary very useful in situations where you sometimes get unusual answers and you want to check and see what went wrong. You can browse. This allows you to create a spreadsheet of the information that is actually in the cohort. That is the cohort itself, its attributes. We'll talk about that in a bit. You can share. That is, you can share your cohort with a colleague. Left-clicking on that. This makes it possible for you to take all the work you've already done and let your colleague start out where you ended up. And he can then move on from that point. And this is a typical, you have all the users you choose from. You choose one user, you move them over. From all the users to the share user box. You hit share, and that cohort is now available, and a copy of that cohort is now available for the person with whom you're sharing the cohort. Hovering again, you can build it, or you can copy this to make an event collection. We'll go into that in the last lecture. You've now built your cohort. You've seen what you can do with a cohort once you have it. For those who want to get another view of this, you can go to your help. You can go to streaming video. You can go to CLG modules. You can go to canvas, build Cohort, and get another view of this. In the next tutorial, we'll show you how to modify this cohort that you built.